Welcome, dear listeners, to another bone-chilling episode of Unveiling Nightmares. I'm your host, C.A. Bainham, and today we have a special guest with us. Other than Frank.J.Edler, author of Scared Silly and A Death at the Office, Part 1, 2, and 3. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
You're very welcome. It's great to have you here. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been writing what I would best describe as dark comedy or horror comedies for nearly 10 years now, mostly self-publishing my work and just trying to do my best to get out my creative energies and share it with the world.
That's wonderful. So tell me a little bit about your books without giving away any of the spoilers, of course.
Of course. Well, my most popular book by far is called Death Gets a Book. It was my first release, but not the first book I wrote. It was the first book I released. And it's basically the story of a person who becomes the Grim Reaper. I should really say a Grim Reaper, because in this world, there's lots of Grim Reapers to do the work of collecting the souls of the dead. And they're sort of thrown into the job and have to figure it out as they go, as they're sent out to get their charge. And, a lot of follies are created along the way.
Yeah.
And that, of course, like I said, that's like my most popular book by far. And I wrote a sort of follow-up. It's not a part 2. It's just another story that takes place in the same world. And that's called A Death in Toledo. With a different cast of characters or a different cast of Grim Reapers, but with all the same premises and stuff. I've also written a book called Brats in Hell, which is basically the story of the battle for control of hell fought using bratwurst as weapons. Yeah. And that's sort of the crazy things that you'll find in a lot of my books is that it's just kind of wacky concepts and stuff and far out there ideas and try to play serious, but you're always just kind of shaking your head and laughing the whole way. That's sort of how my books work.
That's great. So can you tell us about the first horror story that you ever wrote?
The first horror story that I ever wrote. Now, we might have to go like all the way back into my school years, my primary school years, because as a kid I was always writing stuff like outside of school assignments. I just was always drawn to writing for my own entertainment, really.
Yeah.
So if I had to dig back, I don't know if I could think of the first one, but I know whenever I did that type of thing for myself, it would be like some kind of a spooky ghost story or, like a Halloween type of story like that. But as far as serious publishing goes, stuff that the first thing I ever had published was actually a story called Death Gets a Life, which really was what sprung the whole or expanded the idea for me to write whole books about these Grim Reapers.
Yeah.
And Death Gets a Life was a short story I wrote for a competition to get published in a book by this crime writer. He wanted the book he was putting out was called Unfinished Business, and it was about a woman who is a mortician, and that when she has like this sort of gift, when she touches bodies, she gets a message from the dead person to go finish their unfinished business is. That's kind of keeping them in the world, like, to wrap up the loose ends. So he wanted short stories about death that he would publish at the back of his new book called Unfinished Business. And my short story, Death Gets a Book, won. And it's, I did that thing where I just wanted to have fun with something. I didn't want it to be completely morbid and just morose. And so I wrote the story about a guy who lives in Boca Raton, Florida, a place notorious for retirees. And the Grim Reaper that works Boca Raton was kind of really depressed and not doing their job. And all the old people that were dying were just hanging out on the beach, just waiting for somebody to come get them. And the surfer guy couldn't go surfing because he couldn't get to the water because all these old people are on the beach. So he had to go convince Death to go to get back into it, to get his groove back. So he took him out for a night on the town. They had a whole bunch of fun, and he snapped out of his depression, and he took all the souls away on a giant cruise ship, and happily ever after. And that's what won. And it it appeared in that book. That was the first thing I had published technically. So it just all springboarded from there.
Okay, so what inspired you to write in the horror genre?
I think when I first started reading, really, my first thing, like so many people, was I gravitated towards Stephen King. That idea. My first book I ever read I was probably 13. Novel I ever read was Pet Sematary. And I was always just drawn to that. Even as a young kid, I wasn't big on horror movies necessarily so much as horror comedy movies. One of the earliest ones I can remember is a movie called Saturday the 14th that was playing off the Friday the 13th was becoming big there in the early 80s, and they made a not necessarily direct spoof of the premise, but they just used Saturday the 14th, and it had Jeffrey Tambor in it. And it was just really a fun haunted house, ridiculous story that, as a little kid, I could take that in. It wasn't so scary that I was going to have nightmares and stuff. So I always enjoyed those types of movies early on. And, but they always had that horror core to them. So as I grew older and more mature and could take stuff, read books, reading books is really what launched my true love for horror and experiencing it all. But yeah, it sort of started way back when there with the horror comedy movies when I was a little kid.
That's cool. The movies of Pet Sematary doesn't do the book justice. No way at all.
I am not a fan of the movies, and to be honest with you, I haven't seen like the newest remake because I was so off put by the original movie that came out that just didn't do. I felt it didn't do the book justice, and I feel that way often about any sort of book to movie translation. Is rarely for me works. In a few instances it has, but by and large, I don't even bother. It doesn't upset me. It's just like, I don't know, when you read a book, it's so much more richer and built up in your head, and it's the best possible version once you read the book, and it's I guess only setting you up for letdown when you kind of experience a book visually through somebody else's mind and creative vision. So often I'm disappointed, and and I just kind of
the second one wasn't any better, to be fair. So it was complete letdown.
But and I know there's people out there who they'll swear by Pet Sematary too, or the first one, or the remake is so much better, and good for them. I don't want to yuck anybody's yum, but it's definitely not necessarily for me.
Okay, so which authors or works have influenced you the most?
Without a doubt, of course, like everybody else, Stephen King's, your Dean Koontz's, your Clive Barker's. But I also like to point to people who like directly sort of even mentored me more than inspired me big time. There's a gentleman author called named Armand Rosamilia, who early on years ago I did a couple of podcasts, and one of the first ones I did, we just wanted to do two guys just talking about the books we read, because that was our passion as friends. And we launched this podcast, and we said, well, maybe we can get an author on, that would be cool. And there just happened to be this guy, independent guy, that was looking to do podcasts, and we invited him on and talked to him. He was a full-time writer. This is going back to, I think, about 2012 probably. And hearing his story, how he went full time, and he's making a living now off of writing and publishing on Amazon. As we were doing that interview, I really got inspired. As much as I always wrote for myself for entertainment and stuff, it never really considered, putting it out there into the world. I always thought you had to go to college for that and learn how to be a writer and have a degree and have this, master's thesis and know all your chops and your skills and your techniques. Talking to Armand Rosamilia, I realized all you need is the passion to do it, a belief in yourself to do it, and the ability to sit down in the seat and write these stories out. And in this day and age of digital publishing, that's all you got to do. You do your due diligence, you make sure everything's correct, and you get editors and make everything nice and spiffy as possible. But the gateways that were there before no longer exist. So it's it's a lot easier. And I took from him that. And he was the one that really set me on the road to taking it seriously in publishing. So I always tip my hat to Armand as well.
Well, that is a good influence for you, isn't it? Really, someone who can actually spell things out for you and say how you can do this. And it's something that you want to do. You tend to go and do it, don't you? If you've got someone that's talking positively and giving you all the pros and cons.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's you look up to Stephen King, and your Clive Barkers, but I don't call them on the phone every, once a week. I don't pal around with them, have coffee. They're up on pedestals and they're almost not real people. So to have somebody like, an Armand, where he is your peer too, he's not like totally above you. It's somebody you can call and talk to at any time, and he's doing the work just as much as they are, just at a different level. I always say, like, it makes it okay all of a sudden. Like, if he can do it, I can do it. He doesn't have a college degree. He was just, slumming around in retail work but had this passion. You see yourself in people like him, and they, they took the charge. So why can't I? That's always what you say. Yeah.
Okay. So what's the most challenging aspect of the writing for you?
The most challenging aspect is without a doubt the sitting down and writing part. It might seem to be the simplest part, but to do that every day after day, and be dedicated to that, it becomes something like work, and it's not always fun. My writing routine generally consists of waking up really early in the morning, well before I have to go to work, well before the kids have to wake up to go, get ready and get on the bus and go to school. I'm up early. That's my time. That's before everybody else is going, to sit in my seat and write for a half hour to an hour every day and just keep doing that. So I do it in, I don't have an 8-hour day. This is not my full-time job. So it takes a little longer, but if I'm doing it that little bit every day, couple of hundred words, maybe a couple thousand words, in a couple of months, you have a book. As long as you dedicate yourself to that book, you have to, put your butt in the chair every day, no matter what time of day, whatever works best for you. A lot of people wait until everybody goes to bed at night and they stay up late and write, but they write. And that's the thing that everybody, needs to do. And it's oftentimes when people dedicate it or tried to go and write some books, they find that the most difficult is that you can write one day, but you got to write the next day and the day after that and keep doing it and find that dedication in yourself. You'll figure out if you're dedicated to being a writer or not by doing that.
Well, that's it, isn't it? You've got to be motivated to do it. Even if you've had a long day or you've gotten up early, you've still got to be motivated to actually want to sit down in that chair and write.
Yeah. The motivation is big time. And, force yourself. You can sit down and, everybody experiences. I hate to think that writer's block is something that, truly exists. I think it's more in somebody's head. It's not a physical limitation. So you have to sit down. And if you look at that piece of paper, sometimes the best thing to do is just, close your eyes and start typing anything. It doesn't have to be the thing you're even working on. Just start making up anything in your head. Get the creative juices flowing. Like look up a writing prompt on the internet somewhere and just try to, go off of that, or, write about, the breakfast you're about to make yourself when you're getting, anything to get the juices flowing. Because once those words start coming out, it gets a lot easier from that point on. So sometimes, the hardest part of getting started writing is, once upon a time is writing the word once. Once you get that word out, the rest start coming to themselves.
Yeah. Do you ever scare yourself with what you write?
No, that's a big question. You get a lot of people that look for, what scares you is a question you get asked about as a horror writer oftentimes, or you'll see people asking, what's the scariest book you ever read? And honestly, I can't say that a book has ever necessarily scared me. Maybe there have been a little bit of creepy moments in a book or something that maybe makes me uneasy enough where maybe I'll watch some TV before I actually go to bed, instead of just closing the book and going to sleep. But as far as being scared goes, not truly. And it's funny because I wrote a book, based on that sort of prompt, getting asked that question, what scares you? And I always have that sort of answer, like nothing really scares me. I'm a grown man, it's not really scare. But I did finally come up with for myself an answer to that. And there's two things that truly in this life scare me. They're real things. The first thing is kidney stones. I've seen people suffering from having kidney stones, and it looks like the worst pain anybody could ever experience. And I think, and I'll never know, but I think based on what I've seen, it might be worse than childbirth. And I say that with all due respect, and I don't know for sure. But and fortunately, I have not had kidney stones. I'm just going on visual things that I've seen people with kidney stones
currently visualizing all the women now in the world running to the podcast to write a comment.
Yes, I have 3 children. I've seen childbirth 3 times, and I've seen at least that many people going through kidney stone pain. And just by the looks of things, the kidney stone pain might be a little bit worse. And I preface it, I do not know either one. It just looks that way. I know I don't want to experience either pain, to be honest with you. But as things go, I think the only one I might be susceptible to is the kidney pain. And I've changed my diet and stuff to do anything I can to not have to go through what I've seen people go through trying to pass a kidney stone. It looks awful. So that is the first thing I've come up with that scares me. And there was a second thing that scares me almost as much as kidney stones, but I'm genuinely frightened of. And I know you're not from the US, so I'm not sure if you're going to understand this or not, but do you know what Chuck E. Cheese is?
No.
Okay. So Chuck E. Cheese is a restaurant chain, and I use the word restaurant loosely. It's a restaurant chain here in the United States that's popular for having children's birthday parties at. And it's half a restaurant, half a children's playground type of, with ball pits and slides and those type of things. Yeah. And there's an arcade aspect to it. They have video games, and their big food thing is pizza. And they also have an animatronic stage show with this Chuck E. Cheese guy. Now, Chuck E. Cheese, this is the most important part. He's a cartoon character, animatronic rat. Okay. So this all just doesn't make sense to me. He's a rat, a singing, dancing rat. He has a band of different. There's like a bear, a dog, and in his band, and they sing. And everybody sits down and sings happy birthday with Chuck E. Cheese, and this terrible pizza comes out, and all the children eat it, then run into the playground and play all over the place and slide around and run their greasy, dirty fingers all over the ball pits and the slides. And then when they're done with that and they have filthy hands, they go play video games and run their hands over that. And the place is just an honest hell on earth for an adult. For kids, it's the greatest thing in the world. For adults, it is truly frightening to experience. And I had to take my kids. I love my kids, so I never gave them a Chuck E. Cheese birthday party. But other parents don't love their children and do give them Chuck E. Cheese birthday parties that my kids got invited to. And you're just obligated. Kids are going to be excited about going to this place. So I've had to drag my kids there and live through this cringy, awful place. And I said to myself once, if hell had a basement, Chuck E. Cheese would be one floor underneath that. This is terrible. So those two things, coming up with that, trying to answer the question, what scares me? It was kidney stones and Chuck E. Cheese. And then I took those two ideas, married them, and wrote a book called Reggie Rat's Birthday Fun Center and Same Day Outpatient Care Facility. And so there is a book about the things that scares me, and that is Reggie Rat's Birthday Fun Center and Same Day Outpatient Care Facility.
That was fantastic.
I bet you didn't think you were going to get that kind of answer, did you?
No, not at all. Okay. Have you ever written something yourself and thought, damn, can I really get away with that?
Yeah, I guess to a degree. There's a book I wrote called Exploding Bears. And it is a book legitimately about exploding bears. I wrote it for two reasons. There's a platform called godless.com. For those not in the know, it's a sort of alternate marketplace for selling books digitally that, as opposed to doing on Amazon, to a great advantage to the writers, to the authors out there to sell your stuff on this. It's just a better financial situation to write stuff and sell it through godless.com.
Yeah.
But godless.com also attracts people. The audience that reads there are very, very rabid about reading splatterpunk, extreme horror, gross stuff. So I love the idea that gentleman Drew Stepik started godless.com. And he's been terrific. And I've put some of my work up there, but I've noticed, like people are really responding more to the grosser, the better, the freakier, the better, the more extreme, the better. Yeah. So to write something that really would, to the best of my ability, kind of appeal to that sensibility. And this was at the time, COVID and lockdowns and everybody's stuck inside and watching Netflix. And we all watched at the time the Tiger King, the Joe Exotic story, which was an insane story. It was sort of our shared experience. Joe Exotic was the shared experience during the pandemic. We were all stuck inside and it hit at the right time. And we were all talking about just an insane thing. And I said, I wonder if I can write something crazier than that. So I wrote a story about a guy who essentially runs a Joe Exotic type theme park where instead of being able to interact with the big cats, he just blows up bears. And that's the story. I mean, by and large, there's a love story wrapped in it and a secondary plot line. But basically, I wrote Exploding Bears to be, just an extreme thing. And of course, my first thing is if I'm going to write this, there's always those people out there that, don't kill the dog, don't hurt the cat. They're very vehemently against animal torture, cruelty of any type. Book at all. So I tried to do my best to just put it all out there. It's right on the cover. The bears are exploding in this. When you open it up, there is a not trigger warning, but just a warning, and I guess trigger warning, whatever, and the first page, and it's the bears in this blow up before warning. But I also put the caveat but it's so crazy and ridiculous when the bears blow up in this book. It's hysterical. It's just crazy over the top. But I was still worried about that sort of backlash. And surprisingly enough, I guess I did good because I haven't had that reaction from anybody yet. I guess anybody that would be troubled by it doesn't read it. And those not troubled by it always say there's been a couple of people that does kind of make me cringe, but it's so ridiculous in this book. It's not even, you can't even begin to take it seriously. So I feel like I've earned a pass from people that would be sensitive about that. And those that just definitely would be, it's all right there. There's no surprises. It's called Exploding Bears. We'll stay away from it. So, so far so good on that. But I was worried about that when I was writing Exploding Bears.
Well, I would be too. Are there any memorable reactions that you've had from readers that stand out to you?
Yeah, the first one I ever had that I always talk about is my writing is so gross that it made my wife vomit. Legitimately, my wife vomited reading one of my stories. And it took me by surprise because it's a short story I wrote called GROSSeries about basically I turned the grocery store into a zombie story where all the stuff on the shelves come to life and try to eat the people. My wife has an aversion. She has one of those things that just bother her, and that is whenever she sees milk spilled on a floor on a tabletop, she just, I don't know what it is, but that turns her stomach and makes her want to vomit. And I didn't even think about that when I handed her the story to read, and she's reading it, and she got to this part where the milk flopped off the shelves and spilled all over the place and, rose up like a glob and came and attacked people. Well, she was reading it, and all of a sudden she gags and runs to the bathroom. And I'm like, what the heck happened? She's like, I can't believe you made me what? And she said the milk. And I was like, oh no. But yeah, I got her, and she actually did physically vomit reading that story. So that I always wear as a badge of honor when I talk about my stories. This story is so gross, made somebody vomit.
Brilliant. Any other reactions that stand out to you? You've not had any nastiness or any like backlash or anything like that? Has it all been good?
It's truly all been good. And, I say that as a really small time kind of writer. I don't have big notoriety. I've built up over the years. Like I said, I'm doing this almost 10 years now. I've built up a decent sized readership, and it has genuinely been really all good. Just there's always those minor criticisms, but nothing big, nothing a rub. And I appreciate that, but I'm also like, when am I really going to anger somebody? At some point it has to happen. Where's my angry 1-star review? I have a couple of 1-star reviews, but they're pretty just like, this wasn't for me. Nothing really vehement. So yeah, it's almost like I need that. Like, where is that person that really has a really negative reaction to what? It's because you almost need it, right? It's like a balance thing. It's great that you have people loving stuff and giving you 5-star reviews, but it really should not be all that. There's got to be somebody out there that just is incensed by what I write. I would hope, but I just haven't found them yet. I'm still looking though, so.
Yeah, but I mean, even if you were to get like a 1 or 2-star and it had like it was explaining like the book was too gory for them, blah blah blah, it would still go for you, if you understand what I mean. I think with Splatterplunk, I think the more gross the book is and the ratings, if they are low and it says things like that, they tend to do a good thing for the book.
Yeah. If you get that sort of negative, like this was just, I couldn't, the guys are just blowing bears up, and there was just kids getting, bear claws impaled in their heads, and it was just crazy, ridiculous, too much for me. 2 stars, no way. Yeah, that's gonna appeal to somebody from like godless.com where they're like, what? They're, a bear got a claws jam in his head. I got to read that book. So yeah, absolutely. I do believe in the power of a quote unquote negative review. And even if somebody just genuinely 2 stars, 1 star, the writing was terrible, this person doesn't know how to write, doesn't know the first thing about this, that, he didn't put a period there, this word was misspelled, I still give that a pass, because you know what? Obviously that person sat down, attempted to read my book, or did, fight their way through my book and didn't have a good experience. And that's what they came away with. That's an honest review.
Yeah.
The only reviews that are a problem are the people that would maybe go to, be incensed about a bear exploding, and without even opening up the cover, just taking to the reviews, Amazon or wherever, and giving it a 1 star and saying, I can't believe somebody wrote something like this. If you didn't at least attempt the book, then and rate it, that's not really good. But anybody who plunks down their hard-earned money and gives my book a shot, their reaction to it is theirs, and it's not for me to tell them how to react to my book. So I think it's great that they even took the time. Yeah,
it's the right attitude to have as well. I mean, a lot of writers do say that they don't read the reviews, but you can guarantee that everybody reads the reviews. And also, you've got to understand as well that you don't get affected by some of the reviews that you get, because, as you said, they are honest reviews, and you can take it as constructive criticism as well, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I try not to like let negative reviews, the few that have necessarily guide my. I'm going to write what I write, but if somebody says I was at a book side, a 1-day convention thing, and this young lady bought Death Gets a Book, as it were. And she was the daughter of another vendor at the thing. And she sat down, she read Death Gets a Book. I think she might have spit it out in hours. She was quick with it. And she came back over and we had this long discussion about, and this girl is in college. She was like a junior in college, going for English literature. And she was like talking about my book like it was the major thesis of her. I was like, oh my God. But she nitpicked it apart and she was worried about, she's like, there's some stuff I want to tell you, but I don't know if it's okay. I'm like, whatever you want to, tell me what you thought of. And she had pointed out, I think there was at one point when I originally wrote the book, one character started out with one name and wound up getting a different name partway through the book. And I guess one of those names slipped and didn't get changed. And she picked up and she was, but she was, because she was English lit, she was like doing it to help me. And she felt a little bashful about correcting me, but I'm like, no, tell me all this stuff. And I said, here's my email me the problems you have. I said, the paperback books, once they're printed, I can't change that. But, thank God with digital publishing, I can actually go back and modify, the ebook files and re-upload them, and no harm, no foul. And those little things get caught and corrected. And she did that. And, back and changed those. It was like 2 errors, but she picked it out. And I was really appreciative of that. So I'm absolutely willing to, take criticism for stuff.
Yeah.
And I love that stuff.
So how has the horror genre evolved over the last few years, do you think?
Without a doubt, when I first started writing seriously, the big thing was zombies. The Walking Dead was out. Everything was zombie. The world was zombies at that point in time. World War Z and everything. And I enjoyed reading it as much as anything. Some of the experimental sort of things I wrote before were really like zombie stories. And that story I told about my wife vomiting was a zombie story, essentially. So yeah, back to 2014 or so, the world was zombies. These days it has shifted, especially in the last 3 years or so, over to extreme and splatterpunk horror. Something that's kind of been there the whole way, but there's this new wave of extreme horror writers out there that have really been killing it and making great stories, and people have been taking notice. A lot of it's fueled by TikTok, of course, is probably the biggest thing nowadays that's changed the landscape of horror. And I think that sort of combination of these new voices in extreme horror coming up, writing, extreme horror can be a tricky thing because you don't want to write something crazy, bloody, gory for the sake of being gross and over the top. You need some story to that, and that can be tricky, actually. So these guys are doing it really well, and that hitting at right as TikTok's becoming a place where books are going viral through book talk and stuff like that. That has been the seismic change. It used to be first you needed to get on Facebook and promote through Facebook. And then it was, Twitter, and Instagram was huge. It's still pretty big. But, when TikTok hit, the first thing I saw was Chandler Morrison has a book called Dead Inside. It was published by Death's Head Press at the time. I don't know if it still is or not. But I remember the publishers from Death's Head Press posting one morning. They're like, I don't know who did what, but for some reason, Chandler Morrison's Dead Inside sold 1,000 copies last night. I don't know what's going on. And it took a couple of days before they realized somebody had posted on TikTok a top 5 books that I could not, I had to close the book. It was too much for me to read. And Dead Inside was the first one that was spotlighted on that. I think it was Books in the Freezer, the account. And from there, I think there was a seismic change off of that, like that single moment in the whole genre itself. So there's a definite like golden age of extreme and splatterpunk horror going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, they're back on TikTok as well, aren't they? Splatterpunk at the moment. So like with the argument that was going around there, I think it was about a week or so, like people who write it need help or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody gets excited. I find a lot of the drama unnecessary. And somebody who says something to that effect of like, they need to. This person is a horrible person, and they legitimately need to be put behind bars or have psychiatric evaluation. I've always found that's the type of person that's really never ever going to pick up an extreme horror book again. It just isn't for them, and that's just not an opinion that you should use to carry much weight. So when somebody has that sort of reaction, I'm pretty dismissive of it. It's like this stuff, it just isn't for you. It's not going to be. If you see somebody out there who's constantly reading all the big authors and reviewing and stuff, and they were to come out and say something like that,
yeah,
you'd have a much different reaction. They're like, Mrs. Smith, who's always reading Chandler Morrison and Aaron Beauregard, and if they think that Mr. X all of a sudden here is so terrible he needs to go to the hospital, then maybe we're all going to start reading Mr. X because that's a valued voice that's given that type of review. But if it's somebody who's just this is their first experience with it, and that's their opinion, that's a vastly different reaction you should have to that person's opinion.
I suppose it helps as well with the ongoing drama going on there. I suppose it helps with sales for some of the Splatterpunk novels.
No, without a doubt. I know there's, some people might even say like they're, creating the drama on purpose to get that viral thing going. Far be it from me. If they are, I say brilliant.
Yeah.
But whether it's manufactured or it's real, it's definitely driving sales.
It'd definitely be a good marketing strategy.
I think I went into the Books of Horror group, which is another great place to get your book viral. And I said something like, can somebody please get infuriated about something I wrote and tell the world? Because I need that kind of viral madness to happen in my life too.
Okay. So do you have any upcoming projects?
Yeah, I do. I have actually this month, October, it'll first release on Godless. I think it's on the 13th of October on Godless is Haunted Hamburger House is coming out. And then I believe it's 2 weeks out of that, toward the end of October, it'll be out regularly on Amazon and paperback for the rest of the world to consume if they want. Haunted Hamburger House is it's just that it's the story of an old abandoned hamburger joint restaurant that gets one of these ghost hunting teams. I fell for a while into watching these programs on television, the ghost hunters, and using all their weird contraptions and stuff. And I wanted to write a story based around that. So I came up with this because it's got to be weird and wacky for me. So it's at an old abandoned hamburger restaurant. Haunted Hamburger House will be out this month. Then I don't have hard dates yet, but before the end of the year, I'm going to be releasing a book of fairy tales told. They're just extreme over the top, and they're effed up fairy tales is basically the name of the book at this point. That should be out before the end of the year. Again, I don't want to promise anything, but I'm aiming for that. And for Christmas time, I'll also be putting out exclusive to Godless a sort of holiday themed, Christmas themed story for the season, and it's called Exploding Reindeer, that takes place in Wild Louie's Exploding Bears, apart from the Exploding Bears book. Just a little bit of holiday fun I want to release in the world.
Great. Can't wait for that one to come out, especially near Christmas.
It's a jolly good time.
Yeah. Okay. So what advice would you give to an aspiring horror writer?
The biggest thing is, like I mentioned earlier, is if you want to be a writer, you got to write. The best way to do that is to get in that seat every day and write something every day. If it's 5 words, if it's 100 words, if it's 1,000 words, whatever it is, start writing and do it consistently. And do it, comfortably. it truly doesn't have to be every day. You know, that's a best practice. But if you only do it on the weekends, do it every weekends. If you only do it one day a week, make sure you're doing it once a week, and do it. There's no other way to put a book out other than to write it. So it's the simplest, almost insane advice, but it's true. You have to sit down and you have to write if you want to be a writer.
And it doesn't matter how long it takes you either, does it really?
Really doesn't. There's people that have been writing, a book for the last 20 years. And that's great as long as you finish it and put it out. And then just the second advice is don't be surprised when nobody buys your first book. They always say the old axiom is how do I promote my first book?
Yeah.
You write your second. You just keep on writing, write. Once you put, once you figure it out and start releasing stuff, you realize when a book goes out in the world, you've been on it for months, going over it, poring over it, going back over it 20 different ways. And genuinely for me and most people, when a book's released, you're already on writing the next thing. You might have been writing it for a while, the next thing, because the process of a book releasing is sometimes long and arduous. So a lot of times when a book comes out and you're talking about it, you're like, I don't even remember. I wrote that a year ago, So it's just keep writing. Don't wait for that first book to come out. You got to keep going. And that's the second piece of advice.
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? A lot of people think that because you're a writer and you've had published works, that you're making the same amount of money as Stephen King and other authors, but you're not actually doing that. It takes a long time to get to that point, I think, unless you've gone absolutely viral on TikTok. I do think it does. There is that expectation, I think, as well, when some young authors go in there, they're going, I'll write my first book and I'm going to make loads of money. No, you're really not to begin with.
No. Yeah. Then there's people, they get that romantic idea of the writer they see in the movie. And it's I always say that's where you separate the wheat from the chaff. You always got those people coming in and they're thinking they're going to, like you said, make bank. Everybody's going to buy my book. Nobody's going to buy your book. I hate to break it to you. Nobody is in love with your book as you are.
Yeah.
But those people with that mentality, they fall off quick. So you, like I said, it's great that you put out a first book. Let's see if you put out a second book. Let me see if you're for real. But that's up to each individual if they have the stuff, how well they can take. You can't shake that out of somebody's mind that they're going to make money until they're not making money. And then you just see how they handle that bit of news. And if they're just like, well, we're going to keep going with this, because that's how you know if you're passionate about writing, right? It's disheartening. You can, but definitely when you're self-publishing, you're investing not only yourself but a lot of money into getting a book out there.
Yeah, with
publishing and work and layouts and all that stuff that you may not be able to do for yourself. And if you can take that financial hit and not get disheartened about the whole process and learn from it and do better and try to improve yourself each time you put out a next book and write that next book, you got the stuff if you can do that.
Yeah, that's right. Totally agree with you. So thank you very much for appearing on the show. It's been wonderful having you here. So thank you very much, Frank.
I've had a great time, and I'm happy to be a part of this great show that you've started here.
Thank you.
Stay tuned, dear listeners, for more spine-tingling tales and dark discussions in a world of extreme horror. Until next time, remember the nightmares are real, and here on Unveiling Nightmares, we're crafting nightmares one tale at a time.